Hi Year 12, so welcome to your first Great Gatsby PowerPoint slash recording that I want you to watch before we come into class. This recording will have discussion questions in it, so get your book ready for your answers or your laptop and make sure that you are documenting as you go. So let's get started. This is your chapter summary. I will link this PowerPoint to you guys so you'll be able to read it completely because I know that my face is blocking some of it and I can't really stop that. But chapter 1 is basically your introduction to Nick Carraway. He's talking about why he's writing this story. He kind of meets Daisy and all of that sort of stuff for the first time here as well. He also sees Gatsby for the first time as a handsome young man on the lawn with his arms reaching out. He can see a distant green light that, marks the end of the dock, things like that. I'll let you guys give this a quick read over so you know exactly what I'm looking for. So Nick is quite an interesting character and we'll go through him in a little bit more detail in class when you guys have answered the discussion questions. That way we can cover him a little bit more. But this is just your chapter 1 summary. And yes, so here's your discussion questions for the first chapter, and I want 2 or 3 sentences for each question. So, why do you think Nick is telling his story if Gatsby represents everything in which Nick has an unaffected scorn for? So, what do we think that means? What do you think it means that he has a scorn for these sort of people? Where do you think Nick is coming from when he talks about this? We also want to, I also want to know why you guys think Nick is confused and a little bit disgusted at the end of the chapter. Now, looking at what happened in the past, like looking at our summary and things like that, why do you think Nick is just feeling those emotions instead of maybe feeling amazement or something like that? Now, I also want to talk briefly about the preface of the book. Now, this is a poem here. Then wear the gold hat, if that will move her. If you bounce high, bounce for her too. Till she cry, lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you. So the advice of the poem is, I'm just going to give you guys the answer on this one, is go out of your way to impress her with your wealth and status and with your daring do, or, with your ability to do things. Whatever you can do to attract her attention is worth it if she ends up won over, because then she'll be insatiable. So it's basically do whatever you can in order to get this woman. This preface actually goes into the book really, really well. It summarizes almost exactly what happens, except for maybe the ending. But I'll just leave that there. We don't spoil yet. But he's also using these words like, say, then wear the gold hat. A gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover. That's a very weird analogy for someone. It could be calling the main character of this book a fool for what he does. Now, I'm going to leave that with you, some food for thought there, and you tell me what you think this means and what this is highlighting. If you've read the whole book, this will definitely make more sense. But for now, I just want to see what you guys think it implies at this point. So something important about the preface is that there's no such poet as Thomas Park de Villiers, I'm going to say. Fitzgerald made him up in a different book completely. So this is a made-up persona. So it is assumed that the name and inventor persona of this poem also ties into Gatsby's journey, playing with the novel's key theme of the mutability of identity. Now, what I mean by that is Gatsby transforms himself into the glamorous Jay Gatsby. And this poet is also a cover identity for Fitzgerald. So there's this huge theme of changing what you are and changing what you look like and changing your name and changing your entire being. It's basically about changing your identity. Again, it links back to the poem because it's not saying be yourself and this girl will love you. It's saying go overboard and maybe the woman will love you. If you do it well enough, you'll have a lover that will be there for you till the end of time. It's It links in with the book really, really well, and it links in with one of your essay questions. So I want to make sure that I am emphasizing this a lot. This is something you need to pay attention to in The Great Gatsby. All right, so character discussion of Nick. Nick is described as a tolerant, open-minded, quiet, and good listener, and as a result, others tend to talk to him and tell him their secrets. This makes him one of the best people to tell the story of The Great Gatsby. So if Nick wasn't trusted, I don't think he could tell this story because people automatically talk to him. It's like having a friend that you trust and you'll tell everything to. That's what Nick is in this story. He is the narrator, so he does have a secondary role. He's actually not the main character, he's the observer. One thing I want you guys to remember about narrators is that narrators aren't always reliable. Okay, so you have to remember that some authors are sneaky like that. So things that happen in the novel may have felt different to the characters, but it's Nick's point of view that we're getting. Okay, so evidence of Nick being this open-minded person and tolerant person is one of the first things he says in the book. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I had been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. So that's an important lesson that everyone should know, really. And that's something you have to remember about Gatsby and Daisy and Tom and everyone else in this story, because we will criticize these characters. I will criticize them myself. But we don't know their entire story. We get glimpses of it in the book, but we don't know their story, just like we don't know everyone else in the world's story. And that's why this book is one of the most accessible novels in the world, because there are some themes in this that transcend just the book. This can also be transferred into real life. When you criticize someone, a book character, a person, you don't know what they've done and you haven't walked in their shoes. This is something you have to remember in Great Gatsby, okay? Because there are going to be some choices that are made by characters that are insane and you wonder why they're doing it. It sort of moves into that theme of identity, but it also moves into that theme of keeping secrets and keeping something of yourself hidden. You will be able to use this sort of theme and this sort of idea of not knowing someone's story when you come to talking about the characters in this story, okay? One of your questions is based around the female characters, and you have to, in your essay, start thinking about, do we know everything there is to know about these people? That will show your deeper thinking. All right, so these are your quiz questions that I want you to do. In your book, you can just write your answer in, so you can just put 2 and then say, where does Daisy live? You would just write your answer, okay? We'll go through these as a class. This is also a check to make sure that you've read the book. I'm sorry that I have to do this, but it's one of those things where I really need to make sure you guys are doing this, because then you'll be able to write a kick-ass essay. If you aren't doing it, you will struggle. Okay, and I know some of you have been accessing the audiobook, and I think that's brilliant because that will make it so much more accessible for you guys, especially if you're not used to reading. So that's the quiz there. I'll let you pause. I highly recommend you do, because I'm just going to move on for the next 30 seconds. So please make sure you've paused here and answered all the questions, and then move on to the next part. So here's our chapter 2 summary. Again, it's very, very long, but compared to the chapter itself, I've tried to condense it as much as possible. I've stolen a bit from SparkNotes because they do amazing summaries. That doesn't mean you should get all your answers there. I'm just saying that sometimes it's easier to, when you're trying to summarize something, to take it from somewhere. It isn't always reliable as well, so make sure you've read the book. So this one is a party, and it's also... it's not a party, it's more of a gathering. It's only a few people at this thing. And it's full of behavior that maybe you guys can't access because you haven't lived in a time where money and opinions and appearances literally mean everything. Okay, this is the 1920s. So if you had money, you were one of the best people. If you didn't have money, you were frowned upon. So just remember that. Something very important that happens in this sequence, or this chapter itself, is the interaction between Myrtle and Tom. When Tom loses his temper with Myrtle, he strikes at her. That says a lot about this time, because while that brings the party to a halt, no one mentions it later. It's not a big deal. This abuse of women is absolutely fine. So again, that will come into those characters, those female characters. They have things to fear rather than what the men have, which is basically just what people think of them. So there's the difference there. We also learn a lot about Gatsby's identity in this part, what's been made up, what might be real, what might be fake. This idea that his identity is filled with gossip and stories and no one really knows the true one. That's a really important thing to remember when you're reading through the story, especially towards the end, because there is a whole entire chapter there that makes you so upset that no one knew the real story about this person, or the people that did know didn't really care or even couldn't show that they cared. So make sure you read on, because this will be important, okay? It says a lot about how a man's identity is everything. Again, linking in with that preface. So everything in this book is very well, like, it meshes together really, really well, and it reflects that theme of identity. So pay attention to it. There's real subtle things that go on here. Discussion questions. So what does Nick learn about Tom at the end of chapter 2? How does Tom's treatment of Mrs. Wilson affect Nick? And I also want you guys to list the things you've learned about Nick Carraway in the first 2 chapters of the novel. How might his background colour the way he tells the story? How trustworthy is Nick? Again, I did mention before that Nick isn't a reliable narrator, okay? He is a person who can change this, and we don't know how trustworthy he is. We're hoping he is because he's telling the story, but we don't know. Also, look at his background. So this is a man that went to Yale. He has got money. How is that going to affect how he tells the story, okay? I want to hear your theories on this. We will be discussing this in class. It will help you guys write your essays, okay?